Secretary General, Director, other esteemed speakers. Thanks to the GROW team, everyone who's put on this event. Thanks to you for coming, and a special thanks to those people in Greece who are participating in GROW and being part of this really ambitious project that we're going to introduce to you today. Thank you. So, I'm a European. And I live in Scotland. Pavlos asked me to mention a little bit about what I'm doing now. So I'm working to establish something called the Edinburgh Futures Institute. I've spent most of my career thinking about trying to work towards better futures. We've taken over an entire old hospital. It's where Florence Nightingale used to practice. And we're creating a space where citizens, scientists, artists, designers, policymakers can come together to imagine and create futures. In the GROW Observatory, we took on a very specific challenge. GROW's about climate, it's about food, and it's about soil. Soil underpins life. We depend on soil for our food, but it's a threatened resource. It's being degraded at an alarming rate. Also, the moisture in soil plays an essential role in regulating climate. If we want to understand and predict fires, floods, droughts, we can do that by monitoring soil moisture. So GROW is about all of these things. It's about food security. It's about climate action. It's about life on land, about SDG 2, 13 and 15. So to respond to this challenge, we came up with GROW. And our vision is to support a movement of citizens generating, sharing and using data and information on growing and land practices to address these urgent challenges for science and society. And how are we doing that? We're doing that through a Citizens Observatory. So I'll spend a moment to talk about that idea. For me, the background was a project 10 years earlier, in 2006. We were looking at how participation, public participation, creativity, art and design could contribute new data sets to science. And we had this idea. We realized at that time that devices like this were becoming more and more common. More of us are walking around with powerful sensing devices, networked to people around the world. And we came up with this concept of a global observatory of 1 billion eyes, where we could collaborate with people around the world to address major challenges. And that's possible. Some of these numbers are a little out of date already. I'm sure that number's higher of the 79% of Europeans carrying smartphones. Also for GROW, Land for Growing covers 50% of Europe, and there are 8.1 million small farms. And Earth observation services are a massive part of the economy and help us address these urgent challenges such as climate change. Right now, the European Space Agency and other space agencies, NASA, etc., are launching a whole range of new missions. And recent missions have been focused on soil moisture. But it's a holy grail challenge for science to validate those measurements, and in particular, the readings that are derived from models. It's very hard because we don't have real measurements on the ground to validate, to verify those space measurements. And so, the concept for GROW was born. And this feeds into a wider European initiative led by Europe, led by the European Commission, to create an ecosystem of Citizens Observatories. And this is about doing citizen science, which has been around a long time, more than 100 years, but at a much bigger scale, and contributing really valuable data. As you saw in the video, we spend time to really understand where the valuable data is, where the data gaps are for science, to contribute to satellite science, to other areas of science, data that can have an impact. It can extend our ability to monitor and understand the world. It can empower citizens. It can implement policy, inform policy. It can build the market for the sensors and the devices that people use. And it can strengthen the European role in this. So the GROW project is a 3-year Horizon 2020 funded project to demonstrate this concept, to demonstrate that we can do this. We can use these technologies, but most of all that we can come together as citizens, as scientists, as policymakers, as artists to address this, to deliver widespread uptake, robust science, societal impact, and also, we hope, to live beyond that grant. So, you've already heard a little introduction to GROW, you've seen the film. I'm going to tell you a little bit more. So, we're doing 2 what we call missions. One of them is a changing climate mission, and that's the real focus about generating that soil moisture data set, collecting other supporting data. And then we've also got the Living Soils mission, which is about supporting people to inform their practices, to grow food better, and to regenerate soils. And this is what it looks like. It's about people. It's about people coming together. They may already be connected through a cooperative, or they may meet through GROW, but it's driven by the people. Pavlos has already mentioned that we have these places across Europe we call GROW places, where communities converge and where we're focusing high density distribution of our sensor network. And that sensing network is unprecedented. Before GROW, there were 250 sites across Europe measuring soil moisture. We're extending that into hundreds and thousands of sensors deployed. So it's a continental scale, high density sensing network. We've found ourselves in an unusual position as a project. We hold the entire global stock of the leading consumer soil sensor. That's because the company that manufactured them closed its China plant and its whole IoT department. And so we as a project are carrying that forward and looking at how we can replace that sensor so these projects can continue. And we've looked at that data, and the first half of our project, a big part of it, was about validating that data, looking at validity, looking at quality. We tested our sensors, which are produced at very low cost for people to put in flower pots at home, and we're testing them to be used as a serious scientific device. We did that with laboratory tests, we did that by comparing the sensors to high quality sensors, and we found a very, very good correlation. We're also measuring other things. In the film, it was mentioned that we're measuring canopy cover, slope. We need to understand the landscape, land cover, in order to interpret this data, to generate meaningful information. We've also tested novel approaches to validate regenerative practices, so sustainable growing practices that rather than degrade soils can maintain soils as a precious resource. And we did experiments with growers in Europe to compare a monoculture approach and a polyculture approach, and to compare the yields for each. We're also providing growing advice, so people can choose which crops to grow in a changing climate and also adopt more regenerative practices. So one thing we're developing is a database of edible plants, and the times of the year that people plant those in different locations. And that's one part of the GROW app. Can't have a project these days without an app. And our app is a tool to help people submit data, and it's also a source of information for growers. A really big part of GROW is online learning. We're working with one of the major providers of MOOCs, massive open online courses called FutureLearn, and we're providing education to thousands of people about soils, about science, as we heard in the introduction, about the link between the hyperlocal, between our growing space, the soil beneath our feet, and satellites high above, the global climate, to understand the science of that, and also to become citizen scientists. So it's training so that people can conduct these experiments and observations. GROW is about the community. It's about a community in places. It's also about a community online. We're using techniques such as storytelling to build community, to engage people, and we've built our own dedicated platform for that. Unusually, we're using art too. We're using art to interpret these data, to represent these data, so that people can hear the live ecosystem beneath their feet. We have one artwork, not this one actually, called By the Code of Soil, and it represents in sound and image the data of the closest soil sensors to you, but you can only view the artwork when the Sentinel-1 satellite passes overhead. And of course, we've built the back end, the data platform. We're working with colleagues and with other projects on the standards so that these projects can come together, so that they're interoperable, so we can build on other people's work, so that our data can be accessible to more people. And critically, for us, GROW is about what we call closing the loop. This isn't about treating citizens and communities as just a source of information, a source of data. Too often that's happened in citizen science projects, that people are just free labor. That's not what this is about. It's about empowering people, empowering communities, and providing valuable information back to them. So as part of our project, we've looked at the questions people have. So we've looked at the questions that growers have about their land when they're cultivating. So how variable is my land? Are there areas with different soil moisture regimes? And we've looked at our data, which includes sensor data, but also observations that people take about their land and other accessible data that we've brought together. And we've looked at the different sites where the sensors are deployed. We've looked at the distribution of those sensors, and we've tried to work out what we can derive. So the sensors, they measure 4 things. The things that we're really interested in, first of all, moisture, of course, but also temperature and light. And then one of the innovations within GROW is we're developing what we call a gridded product. We're looking at those point measurements, and we're working out if we can derive values for the whole landscape. From those few points in the ground, from this sensor here, if I have another one there, maybe up a hill, can I write algorithms that can enable me to look at the soil moisture across that whole terrain? And then we're working with one of the world's leading data visualizers to represent that information in a way that's useful and informative, but that can also inspire, capture the imagination, bring more people into the project. And this is not even a prototype yet, but this will be a visualization that you'll be able to browse, you'll be able to explore the data, you'll be able to interrogate and get inside and understand the soil moisture in that area. We have other information and services that we're developing. One very important one is available water content, so not just what the sensor measures, but the water available to plants. And critically, of course, providing a data set to help validate the Sentinel-1 mission for the European Space Agency to improve the accuracy of data from remote sensing and ultimately forecast information on flooding, on droughts, on fires, which have been a major issue in this region. So that's a summary. We're developing data, we're working with communities in places, we're contributing to policy, we're developing services, we've built a platform, and that can contribute to those impacts I mentioned at the beginning. It can extend our ability to monitor and understand the Earth. It can empower people on the ground. It can enhance policy and make it more relevant to more people. It can support the deployment of these sensors, and it can build Europe's role in this very exciting place. So that's us. We're all about partnerships for a sustainable future, and I hope we'll have a chance to involve you in GROW and work with you in the future. Thank you for the time.